Welcome to Lead Different.
What would you do if God called you to walk away from everything you thought was secure? Welcome back to the Lead Different podcast. Today we're talking about the courage to do it afraid and the radical trust required to follow your true calling. I'm joined by Kent Chevalier, the chaplain for the Pittsburgh Steelers and author of the powerful new book, Do It Afraid. Kent has a remarkable story of transitioning from a secure pastoral role to raising his own support as a full-time missionary in the National Football League. He's a leader who doesn't just talk about faith. He lives it out in one of the most high-pressure environments on earth. In this episode, we explore the childhood wounds that create our need for security and how Kent had to break a lifelong vow to finally say yes to God. We discuss the unique challenges of discipling elite athletes whose careers are often not for long, and why your identity must be rooted in something far more permanent than your professional success. This is a masterclass in obedience and purpose. Make sure to subscribe and stay tuned as we learn to lead different with the incredible Kent Chevalier.
Why not leadership? Why not lead different?
Welcome to Lead Different, the podcast that redefines leadership and challenges the status quo. Hosted by Daniel Dominguez, founder and CEO of Why Not Leadership. This show is your compass to becoming a better leader through the power of self-awareness. Good leaders foster teams that are engaged, empowered, and energized. Join us on this transformative journey as we equip you with the tools and insights to lead different. Get ready to challenge the ordinary and embrace self-aware leadership. This is Lead Different.
Subscribe now. Discover a new era of leadership. Lead different, because great leaders change the world.
Welcome to the show, Kent Chevalier. Welcome to the Lead Different podcast. I've been looking forward to talking to you ever since the day we were brought together by me, finding you on social media, seeing that you were connected to my good friend, our mutual friend, Davin Salvagno, who helped you publish your book. And man, there's something about the title of your book that just spoke to me. And so I knew I had to be connected with this cat named Kent Chevalier, who written a great book. So we're going to talk about that, but let me start off by welcoming you to the show and thank you for taking time for us.
Absolutely, Dan. Thanks for having me on, man. And I appreciate your energy and I can't wait to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, man, I've been following you, Kent. I follow you on social media. I looked at some of the interviews you've done on YouTube. I've seen you preach. You're a pastor and you're an inspiring figure. You've got a tremendous background. And what I love about the work that you do is how well you bring that to life in the stories you tell. I've already pre-ordered the book, Do It Afraid, and I can't wait to read through it. Here's one of the reasons I'm so excited to talk to you, Kent. I've always believed that anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. Just do it. It doesn't matter because I always, as a coach, I'm a performance executive leadership coach. You can fix bad, right? You can take something that's bad and make it better. You can't fix nothing. So get started. Right. I always tell people, do it. Even if it's poor, you're going to have something to fix. You're going to have something to improve on. And so Do It Afraid kind of seems a little bit like that. I would like to go just through some of the maybe comparison and contrast, because I know there's a faith element to it. And here on the Lead Different podcast, we talk about faith and leadership all the time. So I know we're going to have a great conversation. Kent, tell me, what inspired you to write Do It Afraid?
Yeah, man. So this concept of Do It Afraid, it's Erica and my journey in our marriage and in our ministry. And I wanted to, because I think what's missing in our generation today is a lot of the faith stories, a lot of the, I had to risk it to get to where I am right now. And I think what's missing, I don't have this from my parents. I don't have this from my grandparents. This concept of writing down our stories so that the next generation can know who we were, that they can be a part of that journey with us. And so the whole concept of this book started out when Erica and I realized, our daughters, they don't have our faith his story. So I mean God's story in and through our lives. And so I wanted to write down our history for them. But then I began to think about this in a broader context. So not just only for my daughters to have this, but we work a lot with 20s and 30 somethings in our role right now in the NFL. And one of the things that I know in this generation that they're looking for and that they learn from is our past mistakes. And they say, man, okay, if you're going to be real with me and you're going to be honest with me about your mistakes, I can learn from that. And so I began to picture just 20s and 30 somethings who are trying to make some big decisions in their lives. But then it even broadened out because I think that even my age range, 48 right now, I'm going, man, this is the time when a lot of people, what they would say is go through midlife crisis. And what I think is that we are faced with as we're zoning in on the things that we know that we're good at, the passions that we have, the giftedness that God has given to us. But how do we know that we're supposed to do that God is calling us to do? And so it broadened out even more into this, you know what? I think this is for leaders. This is for people who are trying to make some decisions in life. And that concept of do it afraid, because sometimes in my age range, things can really rob us of what God is calling us to do. And I wanted to provide a framework for people to make sure that they're not just jumping on their own terms, but they're actually getting in on what God has called them to do, what he has purposed for them to do in this life, because he's the one who's gifted us. He's the one who's given the opportunity. He even is the one who gave us life. And so how do we get in on what he's designed us to do? And so I just wrote this book to help people to know how to do just that.
Man, you said a lot there, Kenton. So I'm gonna ask a couple of questions based on that. I've been talking a lot to leaders. I actually gave a keynote to an elementary school staff on Friday, and one of the things that I talked about it, and you mentioned it in your brief answer here. When you've got daughters, so you understand. We ask our kids, I think we're asking the wrong questions. We ask our kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? When they're in high school, we ask them, what school do you want to go to? Right? Yeah. What school do you want to go to? When they're graduating college, we ask them, what do you want to do with your degree? And the question I think we should be asking is, what is God calling you to be when you grow up?
That's right.
What is God calling? Where is God calling you to go to school? And where is God calling you to use your talents now that you have your degree? And you mentioned that, right? God doesn't call the equipped. He equips the called. And I think that's a little bit of what you're talking about when you say do it afraid. I don't think 5 years ago you thought you were going to be an NFL chaplain, right? For the Pittsburgh Steelers, for the multiple world champion Pittsburgh Steelers. But yet here you are. Tell us about how does that concept fit into what you're talking about? I think that they're probably very much the same thing. I'm sure you probably talk about it in the book, and I wish I'd already read the book. But tell us a bit about doing it afraid and saying, you know what, like Moses, hey, I can't speak. Come on, don't send me to talk to Pharaoh. No, I will give you the words. He will equip you if he's calling you to that. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so great question. A couple chapters of the book is essentially the story of how Erica and we had to do it afraid to jump into the role that we are currently in. So I serve as the chaplain of the Steelers. We actually work for a group called Athletes in Action, and we serve the Steelers in that way. And 2 chapters of the book tell the story of what it meant for us to lay down our 2 really good jobs that we had and jump into the unknown of raising 100% of our salaries to become full-time missionaries with Athletes in Action, which is the sports ministry of Cru, formerly known as Campus Crusade for Christ, the missions organization. And so when Coach Tomlin invited me to come on board to serve as the Steelers chaplain, I thought the whole time, like, not even joking you here, I thought the whole time I was going to be hired by the Pittsburgh Steelers. sort of makes sense. Like if I'm going to be the chaplain, but when he told me that the position was offered only through Athletes in Action, I was like, oh no. Like I've got 3 daughters, man. I'm staring college in the face. I'm staring, 3 weddings in the future. Like I got to save all this money. And it was this moment in my, heart where God pointed out the things that I was really trusting in. And that was a consistent paycheck. That was in a really secure position as a pastor of my local church that I was allowed to serve. And then my trust was actually in me providing for my family. And it was this moment that really caused me to look inward of this opportunity that God was giving to me. Like he was telling me in a portion of the book is this journey where I could tell that God was preparing me to do something. It was a 3-year waiting period. And finally, the opportunity was put right in front of me to become the chaplain of the Steelers. And then it was this massive jump. And would I actually obey what God was revealing to me through Coach Tomlin? Would I jump into that unknown? And bottom line, man, I was afraid to do it. Because the last time that I jumped and made a leap of faith like that, it went really poorly for me and my family. Like it rocked our marriage, it rocked our family. When we stepped out to plant a church and we knew that God was calling us to do it, but then it crashed. It literally crashed, and it was so hard on our family. And so I was really hesitant this time around to step out like that, to raise all of my money, all of that salary, benefits, ministry budget, to raise it all so that we could do this. But then God, I've got this core conviction, man. He doesn't ask. God tells, he commands what his call is on your life. And either you're going to choose to obey it or you're going to disobey it. And when we disobey God's command, that's when we get all fussed up on the inside and we are not fulfilling our God-given purpose, which is going to be frustrating to any of us who don't walk in that God-given purpose. So there's so much more that I could share on that story, man. But man, that's essentially how a couple chapters of the book in there.
No, I love that. I want to point something out, Kent, and I apologize for starting that sentence with a no. Yes, I love that. That is really good. I appreciate the perspective that you gave us. When you learned you had to raise your own salary, basically, what belief about security had to die inside of you?
Yeah, and this is another part of the book, man, that I write about. I had this really early childhood experience where I understood that we were growing up we were very poor. My mom on food stamps. There was this moment where I was a paper boy. I had to start working when I was 10 years old. If I wanted to purchase anything, anything like that, my parents said, "Hey, you're going to have to buy it on your own," because we essentially we're buying groceries, barely getting by. We were on government assistance, all this. And there was this moment where my mom, and I realize now that she was probably just short of cash that day, but I went into my little money change, purse that I was using for, paper route money. And there was a little torn off piece of paper written with my mom's handwriting, and it said, "I owe you $2." And I don't know, like, it was one of those moments, it's ingrained in my, remembrance, that I just realized in that moment, man, we're poor. And I made a vow that day as a 10-year-old little kid, I will never struggle financially in my life. And I'm going to work my butt off to make sure that my family, that I never have to borrow money from anybody, let alone my own kids. And it was this moment where I realized that, now looking back, I think God noticed that little seed that began to grow inside of me, this weed that began to choke out God's call and his purpose in my life, that my calling was at war with this vow that I had made that I will always have enough. And I think the fear, what needed to be broken was this concept of, I don't think I'm going to have enough to be comfortable, to provide for my family, for my daughters, weddings, college, all of that. The fear of not having enough. And I've sort of nicknamed that fear as my IOU, based off of that, moment with my mom's little handwritten I owe you $2. So I call that fear IOU. But I know that God is continuing to combat that vow, and that has been broken in my life because we've just watched God do some amazing, amazing things. And he always reminds us that what he's going to call us to, he's going to provide for.
Man, I love that. I've been reading some Bob Shukes, and he does he wrote a book on spiritual healing, be healed, and how those wounds, you just walked us through. The wound was you go into your change purse and mom owes you $2. That's the experience. That created a wound in you, which led you to a belief. The belief was it's bad to be broke. That's a bad thing. Not having money that's the belief. And then the vow that you made was, I will never be broke. I will never have to borrow from anybody. Definitely not going to borrow from my own kids. And then you had to overcome that and really trust, because that was keeping you from having the trust that you needed to take this leap. So now I'm going to ask you this question, Kent.
Sure.
If you had chosen safety instead of calling, what would it have cost you?
Well, when Erica and I look back at this journey that God has put us on, we did not have any category for what the NFL even looked like, the business. Like, I had been a fan of the NFL. I loved, football. I've always loved the Steelers. In fact, I grew up in Pittsburgh. And so if I would have just bowed to the thief of comfort, bowed to the thief of chasing financial security, if I would have bowed at that, I would have missed out on our faith growing and expanding, and watching as our obedience led to God's provision in ways that I did not have a category for. And so it grew our faith in such a way to realize that, I think that many of us, we have faith in a faith. We have faith in a belief, but do we actually have faith in a God who is still alive today, cares about every single detail of our lives, and that when we actually obey his call, his purpose on our life, when we run in that lane, that the God who raised Jesus from the grave, that he can actually use us to resurrect people's lives by introducing them to Jesus. I would have missed out on walking alongside some young men, some young women who, let's be honest, they are extremely good at what they do. They're the 1% of the 1% of the 1% who have made it to the NFL. And I would have missed out on helping these young men realize that their identity is not in a ball. Like, the ball actually hates you. The ball is trying to destroy you, doesn't care about your life, doesn't care about your marriage, doesn't care about your future, that this ball is business now. And what used to be a passion is now your life's work. And your life's work, think about it, NFL stands for not for long. And these young men, the average is about maybe 3 seasons, 2.5, 3 seasons that they get to play this game as their business. And then the ball is shipped away from them and they are left wondering, who am I? Like, what do I do without this ball now? Because I can't play the game due to injury, due to nobody wants me on teams anymore. Like, who are you? Helping young men realize that they're not what they do. I would have missed out on all of that stuff. Now, could I have accomplished it differently? But I do know that God called Erica and me specifically for this season of our lives to be walking alongside the young men and the young women of the NFL, to to help them, come alongside them, disciple them to understand that God is way more concerned about what he's doing in them right now in their 20s
Right.
and 30s than what he's worried about doing through them. But also helping them understand that their platform, my goodness, God's given you a platform to be able to make his name famous, not yours. So how do you doing that? So I would have missed out on a whole bunch of things like that.
And I love that you brought the faith element into it, because you're bringing that to these young men. 2.5, 3 years is not a long time.
Yeah.
You know, we do a lot of stuff when we're in our 20s that we can't do the rest of our lives, right? Everybody says, you know, what was the best time of your life? Whatever we were doing in our 20s, that was the best days of our lives, because that's when we're invincible, right? We're just immortal. There's nothing, you know. I was in the military in my 20s, and it's like, man, how do you get through Ranger School? You're 20. You can get through anything when you're in your 20s, right. You know.
Right.
And the same. That's why our soldiers are young. Our NFL players, our professional football players. You know, you bring up something that reminds me of a question about perspective. I think you know, when we look at ideas, if you look at an idea, it can seem like a great idea until you start comparing it to other ideas, right? And then you figure out, oh, well, there's better ideas, and you pick the best one. Perspective. I think you talked about it. You can be the best player in the world. You can be the fastest receiver with the best hands, the best route runner, the guy that, you know, you spend 15 hours a day working on your craft. And then you find out that your 5-year-old has cancer.
Mm-hmm.
All those football skills don't matter. That's right. Life has a way of putting things in perspective. And I love that you're bringing this to these young men before something tragic like that. And when, you know, I pray that nobody ever has to face that, but it happens.
That's right.
It happens all the time. Your father gets sick. Your wife gets sick. Your child gets sick. You know, I always, the other one is the IRS comes knocking, right? Everything's important until if the IRS is auditing you, guess what? That becomes priority number one. Whatever terrible thing that's happening, that brings perspective. And I think you're doing that proactively for people. Yeah. So here's the question, because you talk about doing it afraid. So as a leader, how do you counsel leaders to discern the difference between fear holding them back and God asking them to wait? Because sometimes it's all about timing, right? Maybe God is saying, maybe I'm putting a little fear in you because it's not your time yet. But how do we discern that? So I want to hear this from the pastor himself. This is going to be, I know this is going to be a good answer.
Well, dude, so this is really why I wrote the second half of the book. Your question is what most people wrestle with. Is this just me wanting to do this, and I'm anxious because it's a big risk, or okay, God, is this really you telling me to do this? And so I wrote the second half of the book called The Leap Framework. So LEAP, and then P turns into PRAY. So it's really an 8-part framework of how do we make decisions that we know will honor God and that we can move forward in confidence that he's the one who's telling us to do this. And I'm not the one who's just initiating it. Because here's what a mentor said to me. He said, we have to understand that what God initiates, he permeates. What we initiate, we have to sustain. So if I slow that down and pull it apart, what God initiates, like what he starts, it's his idea. And we're going, okay, I'm going to do what you tell me to do. When we wait on him, God permeates with his presence, with his ideas, with his power, with his resources. And God's not short of cash, right? Where God calls us, he will always provide for. So what God initiates, he permeates. But what we initiate, hey, God, I've got this idea. Can you get in behind this and bless it? God's going, that's not how I work, bro. If you read the entirety of the scriptures, there is never a success story where somebody initiates something in their own timing that God is going to bless. Because what we initiate, we have to sustain in our own strength, in our own power, in our own ideas, in our own resource. And so I want to slow this down for a second. God, are you actually telling me to do this? In fact, this is one of the most powerful moments that I had as we were jumping into this journey of, okay, God, am I initiating this whole thing to try to become an NFL chaplain? Because I literally said that to God as I wrote in a prayer journal. Am I initiating this? Because if so, I lay it all down. And then right after that moment of confession to God, I lay it all down. That's when I received a text from Coach Tomlin saying, hey, can you talk about the chaplain position? And my mind was blown. Because many of us, we just charge ahead of God thinking, I can do whatever the heck I want. And God's going, nah, no, hold on. And what we think is opposition to our ideas is actually God. So think of it this way. Think of a campfire. Have you ever, been camping? Where you've got to blow on the embers to get the fire going. So we're going with the idea that we initiated. We're going to get that fire going, and God is actually bringing the rain.
Right.
He's pouring the water on it because he's like, time out. This was never my idea for you.
Right.
You're just charging ahead without me. You're doing your own thing. So I wrote this LEAP framework so that we can slow down the process and say, okay, God, I want you to initiate, and I want to be certain. I want to be confident. And then when I am confident that you are doing this, you can give me the courage, because anything worth doing in this life is going to take risk, and it's going to involve natural fear. So I'm giving you the concept of the whole book, right? So when I know that there's something that God's telling me to do, I'm going to get nervous because it's bigger than me. It's a God assignment that he's saying, run and go. And I've got to trust you, God, to do this. And so the concept is I give my natural fear to God, who gives me courage, supernatural courage to be able to say, okay, God, I'm going to trust you to be able to provide for my family and 2 salaries that I'm now going to have to raise to do this role that I know you're telling me to do. So here's what I'm going to trust, God. If you called me into this, it's actually your job to provide for my family. That doesn't mean that I don't work hard. It just means that I am trusting in God as my provider, not me for myself, if that makes sense. And so I lay out in this LEAP framework, LEAP and then PRAY, how we can move forward in God-honoring decisions in confidence, knowing that we're not getting ahead of him and that he's not going to send the rain, if that makes sense.
That makes total sense, Kent. That's really good. What do the 4 letters stand for? I want to give people a little preview, make them want to go get that book. We want listen. Do It Afraid is such a great concept. I want if you're listening, Lead Different podcast listeners, you need to order that book right now. I know we're going to air this after the book is already out. It's on Amazon. It'll already be a bestseller, so you get a chance. But we're going to put a little video out earlier so that people can pre-order and help this become a bestseller. But tell us what the 4 letters stand for.
Yeah, man. So this is the LEAP framework is, number 1, we have to let God lead. Like that concept is we can get ahead of him, but we've got to let God lead. And then E, right? So, in that LEAP framework, E is we have to be able to express our fears, because anything God's going to call us to do and we let him lead us to do is going to cause me fears. But do I know how to name it? And do I have people that can help me process my fears? And so that leads me then, when I express my fears to my circle of trust, I express my fears to God, and I express my fears to those who are in awe of God and who are for me. Then I ask for their wisdom. Right? I start with God. God, what is your wisdom? What does the scripture say on this issue? But then I'm also going to ask for wisdom, the counsel of people who can like let's take business leaders. Ask a business leader who is further along than you, hey, what is your advice? What is God saying to you for me about this issue? We need to ask for wisdom. And then P is essentially, it turns into PRAY, but the first P is this concept of we need to pray through it. A lot of people, we don't stop and communicate with God and give him an opportunity through the process of making a decision. So I have this story of when I was a little kid, and maybe anybody else who played, sports. There's these concepts when you swim, right? So at the end of a race in swimming, they tell you swim through the wall. When I was playing baseball, my coaches, they would tell me, run through first base. Don't slow down as you get to first base. You could, swing through the ball, these types of things. And oftentimes what we do as people is when we get into a jam and we don't know what to do, that's when we'll go to God and we'll say, God, I need to make a decision. Can you help me do this? And we pray up until the decision. But you and I both know that through a process of making a decision, there are weeks and months beyond the decision that we made. Instead of slowing down our prayer life, when we get to the decision, when we get to first base, no. We need to keep praying through it for God to give us his wisdom as we go through it. And then I could continue PRAY, but everybody else, you can grab the book to know what those turn into.
We want people to go grab the book. And I thank you for walking us through, pray through it. Yeah, because, I coach track and cross country. I coached run through the finish line. Don't get caught at the end because you started slowing down thinking you had it and somebody just nips you at the end. You just run through it. I always tell them, imagine the finish line's 10 yards past the finish line. Run to that finish line. And so keeping on praying after you've made the decision. And that is just good advice for maintaining that faith. I did a little bit of homework, listened to a few of your talks, Kent. Let's have a little bit of fun. Tell us about that famous 2.5-yard kickoff you had in high school, because that was funny. But you talk about just being vulnerable and share that with your audiences, and getting in there and you're on the second string and you get to go in a game and tell us. I won't tell the story. Let's let you tell the story.
Yeah,
tell
dude,
us the lesson.
When I was a sophomore in high school, I was just climbing the ranks of the football team, and there was a kicker who was ahead of me. I was not good at football. I've always loved football. And so I couldn't, in front of me were defensive guys and offensive guys that, so I saw an opportunity where I might be able to play, and that was to start kicking. And so we had a kicker ahead of me. One rainy night, we were playing against Hopewell, and we were up by, at this point, I think we were up by 3 touchdowns, and we were headed towards the playoffs. So my coach said, Chevalier, get in there. We're going to sit our starters now. And the rain is pouring down. The field is so muddy at this point. And I go up to kick the ball off, and I slipped in the mud, and I barely kicked the tip of the football. It was so embarrassing. And so what I did, what anybody else would do in that moment, is I faked an injury because I didn't want people to think like, oh, he's such a loser, all this. So my ankle. And my coach comes out to me, and I thought he was coming to check on me. Like he was going to be so nice and all this. And he goes, Chevalier, get to the sidelines. I know you're not hurt. The only thing hurt on you is your ego. Get over here. And so everybody, as I'm coming to the sidelines, man, they were just making fun of me. It was like this moment of like sheer embarrassment. And I can't even remember at this point, like there's so many leadership lessons that you could pull from that of preparation, but the idea of faking it, the idea of lying your way into, like, and everybody knows around you, and you've got to be self-aware enough to know everybody saw it. Everybody sees it. Your leadership is in front of everyone. And so we've got to just be our true self and bring ourselves to the table, mistakes and all. And in fact, most people would have understood, man, he slipped in the worst. I mean, it was raining. So, but I, for whatever reason, was so embarrassed that I didn't feel like I could be my real self with people that day, even though everybody knew what was going on in my life. And so, yeah, dude, hilarious story from my sophomore year of high school.
Well, good. It wasn't, it wasn't the varsity. You weren't the varsity kicker at the state championship game. It was, probably no damage done, but you learned from it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And even coach coming out and you're expecting to, him to hug you and take you off. He's like, get off the field. I know exactly what's going on. And that, it's interesting you say that, because as parents, we see through. As coaches, we see through that stuff. And the ultimate coach, he sees through that stuff, right? And so he's trying to counsel us through it. I love how you brought the concept of asking versus telling. That's such a, I had a great conversation with my good friend, James Madison, and he's going to air before your podcast. So guys, if you want to go back and look at what James and I talked about, but he says he has a prayer that he does every morning. And it goes to the point that you made. He doesn't ask God, hey, God, I'm about to go give this keynote that I signed myself up for. Please make it go great. He says, God, what are we going to co-create today?
Yeah.
How are you going to, what are you asking me to do? Not, here's what I'm going to do. Help me succeed. No. Yeah. What do you want me to do? And then follow that, because so I want to talk about this. There was a delay between the time you were going to become the chaplain for the Steelers, but there was some waiting that happened, and you had to wait through it. Tell us about that time. What were some of the doubts maybe you had? And then you did finally get the phone call, but there was a waiting period. So let's talk about that. And because I think that's important. You got to pray through it, but tell us what that was like, and what were the thoughts going through your head, and how did you overcome the doubt, the fears, and get through it so that you could be there for that phone call?
Yeah. So I was a pastor for, 10 years when something just shifted inside of me. And my role didn't change. I still love my church. In fact, I was a pastor of Northway Christian Community, and that is still our home church. So it was nothing about the church. It was just something, I like to call it, I just knew in my knower that God was up to something new. And the first time that I felt that, it was a familiar nudge, like I'm get ready. And I often will say that God fusses us up on the inside to give us needles in the nest of, I'm about to push you out of this nest, so start getting ready. And I didn't know what that fully meant. And again, I was kind of afraid to chase that feeling, because the last time I did that, the church plant failed. Like, it was bad. And so I didn't want to chase that familiar nudge, but I also couldn't deny that God was up to something new. So I just began in that season of waiting. I write about this in the second half of the book. It's the second A. It's called active waiting. Like many of us, when we know something's coming in our lives, we just get comfortable on the couch and we wait for God, or we wait for circumstances to come our way. But what active waiting is, in that 2-year period of time before I met one of the Steelers who started attending the church where I was pastor, and God started to move some pieces. During that 2 years of frustration and waiting and needles in the nest, I knew God was up to something. I started doing things that I know that God has already told me to do. Things like serving in secret, like going and, like, the least of these, and going and serving. I don't need to pray about if I'm supposed to do that, because God has already revealed it in the scriptures that followers of Jesus, we are supposed to be the hands and feet of Jesus to those who are marginalized, the orphan, abandoned, the widow, you name it, right?
Right.
And so I just began to serve in those places. And same with my wife of, okay, God, you're up to something. We can tell. So we're going to start doing some things that are maybe outside of our normal serving experience as pastor, here. And we're going to go to our local rescue mission. We're going to serve dinner to the homeless. We're going to go and we're going to do what we can to combat human trafficking. And we're going to do this under the radar. There's some other things that as we waited, we just simply, we started employing something called prayer retreats, where Erica and I would actively go and we would seek God. Okay, God, what are you doing in our lives? And we would fast while we were reading the scriptures on those prayer retreats. And we would take long walks and just, out loud pray together. Okay, God, what are you doing in our lives? We can tell you're up to something new.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all these different spiritual disciplines that we began to employ underneath. And we had been doing them, but in the sense we ramped them up during this waiting period, especially the prayer retreats. We literally invested in them. We went away, got a cabin in the middle of the woods, and we just sought the Lord. God, what are you up to? There's other things that we did during that waiting time that God began to, I think what happens in these waiting seasons, so if any of your listeners are in this moment where, man, they're fussed up on the inside and they know that God's up to something, but they can't seem to figure it out. Here's what I think that is all about. God wants to draw us to himself for a period of time to prepare us for what it is that we're about to walk into, because he needs to do some soul work inside of us in the waiting, that we need character stuff, integrity stuff that he needs to work on while we're in that prayer closet, so to speak, so that he can prepare us for, if you use David as a figure in the scriptures, David for 14 years was in the pasture, in the waiting, as he was a shepherd to the sheep. And he wrote so many intimate songs to the Lord. God was preparing him in the pasture for the palace that he would one day inhabit. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what happens in the waiting, is that God is preparing us for our palace, for his glory, not our own. And he needs to do some soul work inside of us as we do. So I don't know if that fully gets to where you were heading with the question, but I believe some soul work, that's the fussing up on the inside, the confusion that we're feeling. Are we going to do our own thing, or are we going to draw close to the Lord during those times so that he can speak to the deepest parts of who we are, so that we can be prepared for our purpose that is coming?
I think you did a great job of answering that. Because I think we can tend to be afraid. And again, that's what Do It Afraid is all about. You get afraid, you can start running away from it. Oh, you know what? Nobody's going to call. I better start doing something else. I better get my backup plan ready, right?
That's right.
Versus, hey, I trust this is what you put in front of me. And you brought up David. I heard a great saying the other day that said, when God wanted to make David a king, he didn't give him a crown. He gave him Goliath.
Right. That's right.
He gave him Goliath. He gave him a big challenge, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes we gotta run through, we gotta fight through, we gotta swim through those challenges.
That's right.
Because the prize is on the other side.
And dude, there's so many lessons from David. Like when you think about his life, he was literally anointed king in front of all of his brothers. Everybody saw him like they got it. This dude's going to be king. But then he was sent back to his old job in isolation. So sometimes that moment of isolation, we think the enemy's isolating us, and God's going, time out, time for me to put you on the bench for a second so that I can do some work in your life before you become a starter on that field. And so, man, there's so many lessons in just that short story of David's life that we could pull apart, that God's preparing him for what's to come. And therefore, God's preparing us in that same way. If we would, to use your word, shift and reframe our perspective on that being fussed up on the inside. God's doing something in your life to prepare you. So do not rush ahead, because if you rush ahead to your perceived palace, whatever you think that is, you will not be ready for that palace, and it will crumble. It will, because you went ahead and you weren't prepared for it. You didn't have the infrastructure inside of you to be able to handle the leadership of that palace. And God's going, trust me, hold on. My timing is just as important as my direction. And we need to get that concept. And I talk about it in the book a lot, because that's my mentor, Dave Buring, he shared that lesson with me. God's timing is just as important as his direction. But we as people, we mess it up all the time, and we rush ahead of God's timing. And he's going, I have some more soul work to do in you. So just be patient with me.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. There, David, man, there's so much there, right?
Yeah.
I want to ask about what you mentioned earlier with Erica, because you talk about praying, taking that silent time, and then fasting, and really being open to those answers. I know there's a lot of leaders listening, and that's you bring up someone who's very important for all of us, is our spouse, our partner in this battle that we're waging, because the world wants us to do certain things, and the world was probably telling you, well, don't do that. What a waste of time to go spend 3 days in the woods with your wife when you could be doing X. What inspired that, and what was the biggest takeaway from that time you spent alone with Erica, praying and fasting and listening for the next steps?
Yeah. So it goes back to the first A, ask for wisdom. My mentor, he said, hey, if you're fussed up on the inside, then you and Erica should practice what Cheryl and I have been practicing all these years, prayer retreats. And so that's how I was inspired to do that, to fast and to pray and to take the scriptures along with, because oftentimes, and I'll just speak from, my history, I would go into things going, well, this is my job. And like, you're here, like, yes, we're a team, all this, but man, I'm leading and going for, with this. And that's where I would get into trouble in my marriage, where I would do what I wanted to do really without consenting my wife, and not to the fullest extent, but essentially what I was doing was, okay, this is what I think God's calling me to do. And I would never, I wouldn't say never, but it was less me getting with her and saying, what do you think God is saying to us? Because when we really get into, as partners in marriage, and 100% of us and 100% we make up marriage, I began to realize, okay, this isn't just my calling. This is our calling. And oftentimes where we get into trouble is that one of us will rush ahead of the other. And the way that we kind of describe it now is that I am the visionary. Like, God gives me all of these ideas and direction. And often what will happen is that God is using my wife as the governor of the timing of the vision. Like, yeah, I can see where God's taking us, but I don't think it's time just yet. There's some things that need to happen. And so on that prayer retreat, and actually we practice this on a regular rhythm now. Erica and I go away once a year. Sometimes we do it twice a year, depending on what's going on in our lives. And we just pray, okay, God, is there anything that you want to speak into our lives, into our ministry, into our kids during this season? And we will seek the Lord together. We'll seek the Lord apart, and then we'll come and we'll compare notes. And then, okay, God, what are you doing in our lives? Because I think, especially when you're making a jump, like we were into this brand new season of brand new roles. If I were to make that decision and say, okay, God's telling me to do this, and you better get behind this, Erica, let's go. And it failed. There is what I believe the spiritual issue is that the enemy of our souls can use that failure to get in between Erica and me.
Mm-hmm.
And so for this decision, it was really important. And I believe for all decisions, really important that Erica and I are unified on the decision before we make a move. Because there's a piece of that where if my wife is not sensing from the Lord that we're supposed to go and do this, I trust her relationship with God enough to know, okay, maybe it's not a, no, but it's a not yet, because he's speaking to her the timing of the issue. So I've learned from these prayer retreats, I trust God because in unity together with my wife, we are one. And we need to make the decision as one, because I don't want to give the enemy a foothold for our future, in our family, in our ministry, in our marriage. I just don't want to give him that. So at least I want to be in unity with my wife, because I value that relationship the most, next to my relationship with God himself.
That's not just good marriage advice, it's good business advice, right? And it's actually taking that business advice and using it in our homes. Man, what a wonderful relationship you and Erica must have, because she's your advisor. In every business, you're the CEO and the founder, and you're the chief bottle washer, as they say. But guess what? You're the visionary. You're going to come up with the ideas. You're going to decide the big vision. But you got to bounce it off of somebody with some realism, right? Somebody that's going to say, wait, have you thought about this?
Yeah. And I've started to say it like this. The Holy Spirit sounds an awful lot like my wife. Mm-hmm. And it's beautiful, because God will often use her to speak into my life in ways that, okay, I trust you. And, and so I want my relationship with my wife to be an example of what my relationship with God looks like. And that's the image that the Apostle Paul gives to us in the first place. So
yeah, absolutely. And like I said, we would do this in business. We don't make a decision without contacting our CFO or our COO and running it by them. It's exactly what you're doing here, and you're applying that sensitivity to the most important person in your life, not just in business. Sounds like a great way to run the Chevalier house. How old are your girls, by the way, Kent?
Yeah, so I've got Maddie 24, Kalea 22, and Ainsley 18. All three girls, man.
All three girls. You're blessed.
That's right.
I have two daughters, and daughters are the best. They just love their dads, and
that's right.
You just don't know a love like a daughter loves their dad. So such blessings. I know this book is going to be a hit. I know that so many people need to read it. I've learned so much. I've taken a ton of notes. I can't wait to air this episode and share it with the Lead Different podcast audience. Kent, I'm so glad you came into my circle. Thank you, Davin Salvano, for bringing us together. That's right. And thank you, Mason Vero, for publishing the book and getting all that together for Kent. Kent, we're going to wish you the best. And listeners, let me tell you something. If you learned something today from Kent, please comment on it. Let us know what you thought of the episode. Share this episode with your friends. Like always, subscribe, share, and comment so we can get this message out to as many people as possible. Kent, it's been an absolute pleasure to spend some time with you today. Hear your story. I know for a fact I want to have you back after the book. After you become an Amazon bestseller, I want to have you back and talk some more, because I didn't even get to half of the questions that I had. But thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And Kent, what do you say we end the show on that note?
Why not?
Thank you so much, Kent. Everybody, we'll see you guys next week on the Lead Different podcast. And we'll see you, Kent, in a few months to talk about the launch of Do It Afraid.
Great. Thanks, Dan. God bless, man.
God bless.
This is Lead Different.
Subscribe now. Discover a new era of leadership. Lead different because great leaders change the world.